So once again, like the last game, Transformed ended up being a decent critical and financial success. Another title in this sub-series seemed inevitable, but honestly, how could Sumo possibly follow up on something as mechanically rich and interesting as Transformed? Going into the game's development, this is something I can actually remember seeing unfold myself, as I was online savvy actively looking into the development of new titles coming out at the time. Back in 2018 at the South by Southwest Sonic panel, a teaser went up announcing a new racing title, the letter R being highlighted with the rest of the game's title left shrouded in darkness. That letter highlight made many speculate it had something to do with Sonic R of all games. I personally saw it for what it was, a cute reference, and yeah, that's pretty much all it ended up being, nothing more. Later, this title was fully revealed in May 2018, causing quite a bit of confusion. Just Sonic characters, huh? No Sega crossover this time. I was a bit put off by the news, but I guess it made sense considering how popular and recognizable Sonic is, and the fact that I'm a huge Sonic fan anyway, means that these Sega character subtractions weren't this huge, detrimental blow to my excitement for the game. Looking at the development history is interesting because a majority of the people who worked on this game didn't have any experience with the previous All-Stars titles. They're newbies. Steve Lycett, executive producer that worked on the first two games, wasn't involved with this game either. That's not a great sign, now is it? However, to not turn this into a Sonic Forces situation, the developers did have contact with the devs who previously worked on the first two All-Stars games for advice, so that's somewhat of a relief, I suppose. Later on, in May 21st, 2019, we finally received what would be now known as Team Sonic Racing.
Team Sonic Racing!
I'm beginning to sense a pattern here. The first part of that title isn't just for show though. For the first time I think, in any kart racer I can think of, teamwork is a huge mechanic and selling point. The main premise is that you race in a team of 3 and work together to achieve victory at the finish line. Apparently Iizuka himself came up with the idea when he was watching his son play a kart racing game against other people, and thought of how he could create a game where they could all play together cooperatively. Aww. Aw, that's actually really wholesome. Oh, keep being based, Iizuka. Sonic Heroes seems like an obvious basis for inspiration considering the emphasis on teamwork and working in squads of 3, but the developers also took inspiration from a number of multiplayer games such as Splatoon and Overwatch. A kart racer focused solely on team play and cooperation is something I don't think I've ever seen attempted in any kart racer ever the more I think about it. It's a very unique concept that could have the potential to be a lot of fun. Of course, the promotion for this game was kind of underwhelming, as they rarely, if ever, showcased gameplay footage, opting instead to showcase the game's soundtrack. And I mean, to be fair, it's not a bad thing to showcase at all, especially when the music is this good. Like, Sega just went ahead and pulled out all the stops with this soundtrack for no reason. T. Lopes, Junsen Oe, Tomoyo Otani, Crush 40, Hyper Potions, they really didn't pull their punches when it came to the soundtrack, and it definitely shows. This is by far my favorite soundtrack of all 3 All-Stars games, and honestly, it's up there for one of my favorite Sonic soundtracks of all time, in general. The main theme, Green Light Ride, is earworm central, and I could seriously listen to that song over and over again, especially the remix in the garage. Now that is some good music right there. Now imagine if they could get Hideki Naganuma to participate in the next one, and we might have the true resemblance of gaming soundtrack perfection. But I'm getting somewhat off topic here. Like I said, despite the soundtrack being amazing, that's kind of all they ever promoted. We did eventually get a single IDW comic tie-in and a couple of animated shorts with Team Sonic Racing Overdrive, and now these were pretty awesome. But only occasionally did they showcase gameplay or new features. The game was also supposed to come out late 2018, but was delayed into May 21st, 2019 for added polish, and we'll get to that, don't worry. So, despite myself not really knowing a whole lot of the new features being added, I was still fairly optimistic this was going to be a good product, especially considering Sumo's previous track record with the All-Stars titles. Personally, my bigger question would be, how would this game compare to Transformed? Because Transformed already set the bar so astronomically high for what an engaging kart racer could be, in my opinion. That begs another question then. Would Team Sonic Racing end up being a worthy follow-up to Transformed, or at the very least still be a great kart racer in its own right?
The answer is yes and no.
Okay, well, to get this out of the way first and foremost, yes, Team Sonic Racing is a good game, great even, but the experience feels lacking in a lot of key areas, and unfortunately it is ultimately a step back from Transformed in many different aspects. The continuous drift and stunt system from Transformed makes a triumphant return, but it feels off. It's still a lot of fun, but it doesn't feel as tight. Boosts feel less impactful. The game overall feels slower. The handling, while solid, doesn't feel as solid. Like, what I'm trying to get at is that the general feeling of driving around and whatnot still feels good to do, but it's just not as good as Transform. It's not where I think it should be. And since the vehicles no longer transform mid-race, and consequently the course design doesn't change to reflect that element either, it also ends up being not as exciting as a result. While it may just seem like I'm bashing the game right out of the gate for not being transformed, the handling and sense of speed overall still feels fine enough to be enjoyable, and the main hook of Team Sonic Racing is what truly makes it stand out all on its own, the team mechanic. Essentially, as mentioned previously, you race in a squad of 3, and the main premise is to use teamwork to help each other out throughout the race so that all of you can score the highest. Yeah, it doesn't really matter if you achieve first place. If your teammates consistently place lower than you, you can end up losing at the end. It's a very unique spin on the standard kart racer formula, and one that I feel works pretty well. Basically, when you work together, you can perform a variety of team actions. One example is a slipstream. If you're in the lead of your squad, for instance, you leave behind a yellow trail, and anyone who stays in it for a bit and leaves will receive a speed boost, otherwise known as a slingshot. One of my personal favorites in this game is the skim boost. If you spin out and immediately lose speed, either because you were hit by an item or you steered off course or into a wall, happens to the best of us, don't worry. If a teammate is going faster and moves past you while being in close proximity, you immediately get a huge speed boost to get back into the race. You can also do this to a teammate that's wiped out as well. It's a very fun way to somewhat counteract item shenanigans. It keeps the pace going and is immensely satisfying to pull off. Finally, there's item transferring. It's as simple as it sounds. You transfer items you don't need to teammates who do, or you can request items if you don't have any. Say you're in the lead and you have an item that doesn't really benefit your current position, like a projectile weapon, you can now discard that weapon and give it to a teammate who can better utilize it. And of course, taking out rival characters also counts as a team action, but that's self-explanatory, I suppose. Doing all of these team actions charge up your team ultimate meter, which, when activated, basically gives you a super boost, charging through the track at an incredibly high speed, ignoring terrain, hazards, and can wipe out opponents that collide with it. The catch is the duration of this ultimate ability lasts longer when all 3 of you activate the ability at the same time, requiring some coordination. But really, if you want to do well in Team Sonic Racing, everything requires coordination. They weren't kidding when they said that this racer is all about teamwork. Working together is the best way to win races, assuming you're playing with friends or locals. With computer allies, it's not really feasible to practice coordination considering you're playing with literal robots, but honestly it is still possible to try and help your allies out with skim boosts, item transferring, and slipstream, so the team mechanic is still pretty fun to use regardless. The one lone exception to this is the Team Ultimate meter, basically because every teammate needs to press the button and activate it at the same time in order to make the ability last longer, and it's kinda hard to do that when you have bots as teammates. I mean, I assume they all press it automatically when I activate it, but I'll never know for certain. It's the biggest flaw I've found when playing solo. The characters you pick are also separated into different classes, so to speak, a speed type, power type, and technique type. Speed types get the highest top speed, as you would expect. It can even perform a radial burst, which disrupts incoming projectiles if you have a level 2 boost or higher, but they have the worst acceleration and poor defense to attacks overall. Technique characters can drive on any terrain and because of that are able to take shortcuts more often than most other classes can't, and can also magnetically attract rings. Power characters can smash through track hazards no problem and don't spin out when hit by an item, but have the lowest speed and worst handling out of the 3 classes. Normally, these class types wouldn't be too exciting, kind of why I also don't really care about the class systems and riders much, but with the whole emphasis on team play, this opens up some really fun, interesting dynamics. To give a couple of examples real quick, a power character could intentionally take the lead of your squad to mow down stage hazards that block shortcuts, such as the one path in Frozen Junkyard for instance, allowing your team to take an early advantage. Or, you could intentionally have a technique character use this ability to cut corners to increase slipstream uptime. There's all these interesting micro-interactions that make Team Sonic Racing more engaging. Despite the overall driving and mechanics being a step down from Transformed, the team mechanic is fun and unique enough to stand out on its own to still make races engaging. The character selection I find to be a mixed bag overall. Insert obligatory complaint about Zavok here. Ignoring the whole it's only Sonic characters deal, I honestly don't have a problem with who gets in and who doesn't, but as many have pointed out, the pairings are a bit weird. Team Sonic and Dart makes sense, but why are Chao solo driving with Team Rose and not Cream the Rabbit? It's because she's too young to get a driver's license or something? Or how about Vector team up with Silver and Blaze for some reason? Espio and Charmy are mentioned in this game, but Team Chaotix isn't actually a team you can have, which is a pretty big missed opportunity, I feel. To take a brief detour and talk about the items real quick, they've sort of regressed back to the first All-Stars game, and they're used more as traditional Mario Kart-esque items, only now the items are wisps. While many can complain about the wisp reappearing in a game when they don't need to which I argue Planet Wisp is one of the zones you race through, so of course the lists are going to be in this game, I'd also go as far to say that they've finally achieved the whole weapons now reflect the series they're based in point that I've been complaining about for a while because, you know, they're wisps from colors. It just makes a lot more sense. There are some wisp weapons that are more unique, like Laser just shoots a giant laser forward, Spikes rams into other cars and causes them to spin out, and Burst leaves a burning trail behind you, but the rest of them just kind of feel like recycled Mario Kart items again. Rhythm is Blooper, Drill is the Bullet Bill, Lightning is, well, Lightning. They even introduced a brand new Wisp in this game, the Jade Ghost Wisp, only for it to basically function exactly like Booze, where you phase through other racers and steal their items. Quake, on the other hand, functions similar to the Swarm item from Transformed, except it's 1,000 times worse in every single way. In Transformed, Swarm seemed intimidating, but you could always maneuver around the Swarm no matter what situation you were in if you were skilled enough. With Quake, the stone pillars are way too close to each other, meaning unless you have an item or you're just stupidly lucky, you're going to get hit every single time. It's not very well designed at all. On a different topic, the track design is unfortunately somewhat of a low point, though not entirely, for a couple of reasons. The main reason being that like 50%, actually roughly 42% because math, of Team Sonic Racing's tracks are ripped straight from the first two All-Stars games, most of them being from the first. 8 are from All-Stars Racing, 1 is from Transform, just with the boat section removed. I said before that I'm not really a fan of the barren track design in the first All-Stars game. It's far too basic and empty for my liking. You've already heard me complain about it before, but thankfully I think the team mechanic makes these tracks a bit more interesting to traverse through with all the multitasking you need to perform while racing. Good way to keep the brain engaged. As for the brand new tracks created just for Team Sonic Racing, honestly I gotta say they're pretty great. They're not Transform levels of crazy, of course, but the design is solid overall. There's a lot of cool shortcuts to take, there's of course some obstacles to dodge, though I think there are still a couple of odd instances of design. Take Sky Road for example, where you get launched into the air at the beginning of the stage for a good chunk of time, but since you only get a maximum of 3 stunt boosts while in the air, you just end up with a ton of unnecessary airtime. Just that one instance I find weird, and it's arguably not even that much of a complaint, but in general, the new tracks are very solid overall. Thematically, they're what you've come to expect, pulled from a variety of locations Sonic has been through over the years. Each location has 3 tracks per zone, so it's a pretty neat reference to the traditional zone and act structure Sonic is known for. Seaside Hill is back, as is Casino Park and Final Fortress, but there are also brand new environments. Sandopolis from Sonic 3 and a bit of SA1 and 2 thrown in as well. Glacierland, inspired by a mix of Unleashed and Forces, Rooftop Run from Unleashed, Planet Wisp from Colors. The new environments are cool to see, and there are actually a lot of cool set pieces in these tracks that stand out. Like in Planet Wisp, you occasionally race by the Mother Wisp from the DS version of Sonic Colors, or how in Sandopolis you encounter King Boom Boo from SA2. Unfortunately though, there just isn't much new to go around, and that's my biggest issue. In total, there are only around 21 tracks to play, and after a while you start to see a lot of recycling of the same repeated tracks over and over again. And this is especially true in the campaign. It gets pretty repetitive after a while. Speaking of campaign, Team Sonic Racing features a full-on story mode unlike the previous 2 All-Stars games, though honestly it's really nothing spectacular, and that's putting it lightly. The cutscenes are presented in a fashion similar to Sonic Rivals of all games, full-on voice acting with still character portraits changing every now and then to convey a different expression. It's a somewhat cheap, low-effort way of presenting a story, but honestly, it's a racing game. I'm not going to expect much from the plot, and that's including the presentation. Basically, the main gist of the story is that this Tanuki known as the Donpa invited Sonic and his friends to test out his supercars, and the winner of the Grand Prix being able to keep their supercars. Many are suspicious of the Donpa, as his mannerisms and motives are vague and fairly mysterious, while Sonic really just doesn't care and wants to race and have a good time. Most everyone suspects that the Donpa is secretly working for Eggman. Until eventually Eggman just appears out of nowhere, and then the plot shifts to another Eggman did a bad and Sonic and Co has to go stop him deal. Turns out Dodonpa wasn't working for Eggman after all, and just really liked making good cars. The end. Nothing much happens here at all. Again, I wasn't expecting much of anything out of the story, but my word is it uneventful. The acting is decent, with one exception. I don't really like Knuckles' new voice. I understand Travis couldn't reprise his role as he had family to take care of, and I don't know if it was just the direction that was the issue, but oftentimes he just sounds like a dopey surfer dude, bro. Maybe he'll improve over time, but I'll have to wait and see on that front if he voices Knuckles for the next mainline Sonic title. The characterization overall is whatever. Not great, but like, it's a story on a kart racer. Again, not really expecting any high quality material here. Though for some reason what irks me is what they did to Zavok. In Lost World, he despised Eggman, genuinely couldn't stand him, and throughout the story he was depicted as this commanding, manipulative tyrant. Here he's just a dopey Eggman pawn, willingly obeying him for no good reason, even taking insults to the face with almost no reaction. It could be explained if, like, Eggman got his hands on another magic conch shell, but they didn't do that. Zavok gets weirdly mischaracterized here, and Good lord, you see what you're making me do here, Team Sonic Racing? You're making me complain that Zavok's characterization has been watered down compared to previously. Zavok of all characters, you're making me complain about how Zavok has been done bad. I feel like I'm going insane here. The dialogue is kind of terrible, but thankfully it's entertaining in a so bad it's good kind of way.
No! Epic stunt fail! No! Epic stunt fail!
So there's that at least. If you do end up hating the in-game banter between characters, the game thankfully does give you the option to mute it, but in the campaign you can't really do much about the cutscenes aside from skipping them. Although to give one notable exception, this scene is actually kind of funny.
I'm so gonna own you, Silver.
Okay.
No, you're supposed to say in your dreams, Sonic.
In your dreams, Sonic.
Too late. The moment's passed.
In order to progress in the campaign, you need to collect stars as rewards for beating races and fulfilling certain objectives, and then use those stars to unlock the next area, similar to Transform's World Tour mode. Unlike that mode, however, you can't really unlock any extra content with the stars you earn, like new characters or stages. It's only used for progression to the next area. You can also participate and earn medals and extra challenges if you need to earn stars and keys that way. I hear so many people complaining about how bad these challenges are way too often, so that's why as a completely sane individual, I went ahead and got the platinum ring for all of them. Truth be told, they aren't really bad at all. Some are actually quite fun. The Daredevil challenge, for instance, requires you to pass through checkpoints in order to score points. Yellow simply increases score, while red increases the point multiplier, with each boosted higher if you drift through them. It kinda makes it look like you need to drift through the entire course, but you really don't. All you need to do is this, and the game counts it all the same. On top of getting platinum in all the challenges, I also collected all the stars in adventure mode. Why did I do this? As I said prior, I am completely insane. You don't really get any reward for doing this, it's just for achievement fodder, so I don't really recommend doing this. I guess I just like torturing myself. Well, again, to call it torture is a bit of a stretch, but getting all stars in the campaign is very exhausting. Remember back when I said there's a lot of recycling in the campaign? Yeah, I wasn't kidding. You pretty much burn through almost all the tracks in the first third of story mode, and from then on the rest of the matches are either repeats or mirror mode races. You can tell they were struggling to fill up the rest of the campaign. It's super tiring to go through. To shift the subject for a bit, when you complete a standard race, Grand Prix, or other challenge in the campaign, you earn credits which you can spend on mod pods. Essentially think of it like a loot box system, only far less psychologically manipulative. Mainly because you earn so many credits in-game and there is no option to spend real-world money on credits via microtransactions. Wouldn't it be nice if other kart racers learned this? But basically you spend 10 credits at a time to unlock mod pods, customization options for your vehicles, and let's just get this out of the way first and foremost. The amount of customization options you can apply to your vehicle is utterly insane. You can give it different engines, tires, front and back parts, you can add stickers and decals to it, customize the color scheme, the texture, even the freaking horn is customizable, it's ridiculous. This is all pretty commendable, and is something you can spend quite a while just tinkering around with, getting everything to be just the way you want it to be, creating a unique, dapper instrument of speed to show the world who you really are. Or, you can just give up, slap the legendary golden parts on everything, and drive around town like you're Scrooge McDuck. Either one works. Now, while the car customization feature is pretty cool, unlocking the customization parts is not. First off, the fact that you could get so many credits and yet only spend 10 at a time just for one single item is absolutely agonizing. Would it have killed them to give us a spend 100 credits or more option to get like 10 items at once instead of slowly, painfully unlocking them one by one? This is no way to live, man. And speaking of which, what you get in a mod pod is randomized, again, completely to a loot box system. You don't get any duplicates, of course. You will eventually get every custom part for every character if you spend enough credits. But if you're wanting a specific part for a specific character, you're kind of at mercy to the luck of a draw here. Personally, I think a shop system would have been much simpler and more fulfilling than this randomized reward system, honestly. Outside of adventure mode, you get the typical single and multiplayer offerings, standard races, Grand Prix, time trials, which are once again pretty difficult. The game even allows you to race solo instead of using the whole team mechanic, but like, why would you do this? The team mechanic is good. This is just the same game as previously, but even worse. And finally, you have the online mode, which is a robust, polished, incredibly populated test of your extreme skill as you compete with millions around the globe to see truly who is the better racer. I think it's no secret by now that the online in Team Sonic racing is notoriously awful. I didn't think it was even spectacular at launch when I played it with a couple of my friends, but now, good lord, nobody's playing this game online. It's a literal ghost town. There are more people playing Transforms online mode, and that's just kind of sad. I mentioned previously that this game was initially delayed from late 2018 into May 2019. Wanna know the reason why? No, it wasn't for added polish of the game itself. It was the online mode. Issues with online connection were the sole reason this game was pushed back to 2019, and the online is still this bad. Well, if that doesn't sum up a certified Sonic the Hedgehog franchise moment, I don't know what will. To summarize, I still think Team Sonic Racing is a good time. Certainly better than the first All-Stars game by a huge margin, but it's just nowhere near as good as Transform. The transforming vehicles were a ton of fun, and while the team mechanic is a great alternative to help the game stand out on its own, it's just not enough. Not to mention, the general handling, overall speed, and boosting is not as strong, and the general physics, while fine, can be super wacky, unpredictable, and even broken at times, like...
No! That's not how it's done!
Okay. In terms of presentation, well, I initially got the Switch version, but the PC version looks pretty clean. It's vibrant, colorful, runs smooth as butter. The vehicles themselves kind of look off, like a lot of them look way too shiny and somewhat plasticky, though admittedly that might just be from one of the texture options you can customize your car with, but it's still pretty good otherwise. I'd say the general presentation gets a solid A. I managed to have a fun time. I can still have a fun time whenever I go back to it. It's still a great racing title. It's just, not as great as I hoped it would be. It also, barely goes on sale from my experience on Steam, so honestly, if you want to play this, wait for a price drop or for a bundle or sale event. Even at that base $40 price, I still think it's a bit too steep. And with that, it looks like we are finally done with the All-Stars Racing Series retrospective. Good lord, this was a long one. In hindsight, it probably would have been easier to stick with a single game review or discussion, but this is something I always wanted to get out, so I'm glad I got the opportunity to do so. Despite being a response to Mario Kart and nothing more, the All-Stars Racing trilogy eventually turned into its own unique thing with a ton of creativity and variety, which is incredibly super exciting for the future. Sumo Digital has stated that they're down for making another All-Stars game, so who knows? We could end up getting an even better sequel to Transform down the line, or something new, incredibly innovative, and super different entirely. I don't really know what it could be, but I do know that when they decide to do it, if they decide to do it, based on my experience with their past work, I can easily say it's going to be in good hands. Or not, because Tencent might screw them over, there's always that, I guess.